Hello, guys, and welcome. Today I have an exciting guest that I feel like is long overdue. Her name is Jamie Graber, and we have been parallel to one another in so many ways. And we really came together a few years ago. And then this past year brought us together again. And I'm so excited for you to hear our conversations, for us to chat with her. She is a truth seeker. She has an Aquarius moon. So obviously I'm in love with her. When you meet those people, and you guys have been on the other side of this, where like you hear me when I'm chatting and talking to those people that just feel like we're connected on a soul level, that is Jamie. Like I just feel that way with her. She also practices and teaches Kundalini. She has background there. She is very into astrology. We're going to talk about so much today. And recently we've connected more over just like life and the events that go on earth and being a spiritual being, holding space during these times. So I think you're going to love this conversation and I can't wait. I can't wait to get into it. I'll see you on the other side. Jamie, I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. As you just said, how has it taken this long?
I know. I said in my intro for this podcast how we've been kind of like parallel. Like we've met, I've seen people share about you and your work, and we met, then like we hung out, but then like so much time passed, and then this past year has like brought us back together. Yeah. And you're such a grounding force. I also shared how you're an Aquarius moon, so obviously I'm obsessed. But like your wisdom, your insight.
I think the rising is really what is the most telling about someone.
Really?
More so than the sun, more so than
What is your rising?
Sagittarius.
Okay.
And like that to me like makes so much sense. But in general, it's like because it determines the houses. And it's like
true.
So that then to me, and again, like I'm not like I work with the moons. I am all about the moons. I believe in them, and even if you don't believe in them, I still think they're really powerful. Like the thing that's great about them is like you don't have to believe in them for them to work. But I'm not an astrologer, but like my take on everything is like it has to be about your rising, because that's what determines your houses, which I think is so much about like you and like how you. Anyway, that's my take.
True.
Anyway, so
no, I love this conversation because I feel like I went through most of my life knowing that I was a Libra sun, and I saw all of those things
which makes sense,
in me.
Though, too. Yeah.
Thank you. Like I could so see all the Libra aspects in me and the ones that I'm trying to like continue to evolve and grow. And then when I came into this work, I've learned I was a Leo rising, and I was like, aha,
which makes total sense. I have no Leo or Gemini in my sign, really? And that makes total sense to me.
Wow.
Like and it's weird, like none. And so like it makes total sense to me again, because the more someone knows me and you think of those two signs, you're like, yeah. And then like if you read my chart, it's like so clear. Like I'm so about, me and you talked about this. I feel like me and you, because this is how I am, the first time we met was at Melissa's event when you were launching.
Yep.
And literally within 2 seconds, me and you were deep. We were
in
we were like
portal.
going down,
like
and like it was as if we knew each other. But that's how I am, because like I don't know how to do surface, right? And so like that Gemini energy to me is like very surface, very chatty, very social. And it's not that I'm not social, but like if I'm gonna be in a room, I'm gonna find like one or two people, and I want to go deep. Oh no, all of it.
That's why we found each other.
I don't want to go shallow. I want to go deep. And so I think it's interesting. And for me and what I do in my life, when we were just talking on Instagram and all that, when you're like, be in front of the camera. I love when you're a camera, right? That's what you're saying to me earlier. It's like I have no Leo. So I know this idea that like the light needs to be shined on me. And I think that is so interesting when I look at myself. It makes so much sense that neither of those things are anywhere near, because of like how I interact with the world.
So, but now you're feeling this pull to it, right?
So one of the things I think is really, really tricky is that we all believe that I am this way. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, as I just said, I'm all these things. Mm-hmm. I think the point of our life is to kind of experiment and play with all different things and not just get into these sets of like who we believe we are. Because so often it's a pattern that we're running, not actually who we are. And we think it's who we are because we've been running it for so long. Yeah. the biggest thing for me to understand is like, is that thing that I do, that I say is me, is it bringing me forward? Is it taking me where I want to go? Is it moving me in the direction that I want to go? If it's not, or if there's a chance that it is not, then I have to try to run a different pattern, because then it means that it's just a habit of something I've been picking up and continuously do, but it's not actually me, because the things that are me will take me where I want to go. And anything that is inhibiting me from doing that is not actually me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm working on trying to understand, because one of the things is that like, I'm here to help people. I'm here to make people have a different experience and to really understand themselves more and understand what's projected onto them and how to be them, like true them, so that they can be aligned and they can be here to be, you know, what they're here to be in the world. And I think that because of the patterns and stuff that we have, whether it's from childhood or whether it's from older, that we pick up, it stops us. And so for me, a lot of what I say is like, I'm only for like these select few, right? The people who get to know me, get to see and get to be touched by my work. Now, is that helpful? No, because there's so many more people I can touch if I get out of my own way and say like, no, like I can look at the camera and talk. Like, as we were just talking about before, like my teaching, if you work with me, like I'm teaching groups like on a camera talking. So like that is a skill set. And so there's a part of me that has this idea like, oh, I don't do that. Or I have judgment. Oh, she does that, but I would never do that. And I can put down, I can be defense. You know, Gabby talks about like being outside of self. And like a lot of what I'm thinking about for myself right now is I say I don't do these things. And a lot of it is a defense mechanism against me putting myself out there. And so I'll say like, oh, that's not me, but I have to try it to decide if it's me. And I have to give it a chance for it to be really uncomfortable and still decide to do it. And then I get to determine if it's me or not. And so I really haven't shown up on social, and I have a lot of story and a lot of like story around it, and therefore judgment on other people. And it's not necessarily taking me where I want to go, because I want to help more people. I want more people to feel how I know that they can be feeling, and I see so many people not feeling that way. I believe that the way I teach and the way I understand the subconscious mind and how that can help people and change people is really, really important. Yeah. But if I don't share, then how do they find me? Right? And so we're living in a world where I'm like, but I'm not a content creator. Well, guess what? It is 2025, lady. And so if you want to change people's lives, they have to be able to find you. Yeah. And so for me, I'm working on in process, you know, we talk about evolving, you know, and it's like all about changing and getting to know different facets of ourselves. Now, if I continuously try it on and it feels really wrong in my body for a continuous amount of time and it's not doing anything, then you're like, okay, no, it isn't me, but I have to try it. Porter, my son, the other day,
I love that name.
Yeah, it was my husband's. When I were going to, when we were first dating, we were very casual, but we were going to go to Morocco together. And I went with him someplace and he had to do his ID. And they're like, William Porter Hickox. And I was like, and I heard Porter. I'm like, is Porter your name? And he's like, oh, it's my middle name. It was my grandmother's last name. I'm like, oh. And then when we got pregnant, literally the second we knew, we looked at each other, I'm like, you know the name, right? And we never talked about it before that. And I'm like, it's Porter. He's like, obviously. So thank you. That. But he was, he does Legos. Like he's really, really into Legos. He's super into building things. And he came over to me, and I don't want to do Legos at all. Don't want to do them. And so I'm like, he comes over to me. He's like, Mommy, can you help me with this? I'm like, Daddy does Legos with you. I'm like, I'm not the Legos person. He's like, Mommy, you gotta try. He's like, if you try and you can't do it, that's okay. But you gotta try. And I was like, okay. That's and I was able to do it. And he goes, see, he puts his hands on my back and he goes, see, you did it. Can you imagine if you didn't try? And like, I'm like, God, where does he get this from? And Will's like, where do you think he gets this from? Porter looks exactly like my husband, but it's like my personality in a little miniature of my husband. It's like one of the craziest things. Aww. But yeah, but it's the same thing. It's like if we don't try things, and again, these things are going to be super uncomfortable, being on podcasts can be uncomfortable, like being in front of people, like owning the fact that like I have something to say and people need to hear it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't think that I'm alone in that. And I think that one of the things that's interesting on social media is that there are some people who were born loving the attention. And so, or loving to be seen like on a camera, right?
Leo risings.
My friend right here, right?
Leo
and so
rising.
it's super natural for you to like put the phone up in your bathroom
Yeah.
and start doing your skincare
Yeah.
and just talk, right? And like and put it out there, and it's supernatural. Now there's a lot of people like me out there that like that feels really weird. Me, not evolved and not actually doing the work, judges you and stays off camera.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where another unevolved version of me is puts the camera up and replicates what you do and feels completely uncomfortable. What I'm in the process of, and I hope that I give people permission to do this for themselves, is figure out how I show up in a way that allows people to see me, but doesn't try to replicate someone else.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I think that in this day and age, social media is here. And this is, in this moment, who knows? The world is moving so fast. So who knows like how it's going to change. But if we want to have an effect on the world, if we're doing work like I'm doing, like you're doing, and we want people to know about it so that they can actually change and grow, then we have to be able to put ourselves in uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable moments. And that's where I'm at. So it's not as natural for me because I don't have Leo rising, right? And no Leo again in the chart, but that doesn't mean that I don't play with it. And I don't try to find a version of me that does it. So for me, for example, when I'm doing it, like almost like I imagine when you're doing it, you're seeing yourself talking to a huge crowd. For me, when I'm doing it now, I'm talking to a person.
No, me too.
Okay.
Like sometimes people be like, oh yeah, I saw that you did it. I'm like, how'd you see that? Like, of course they saw it. I shared it on my story, but I like don't think anyone's watching. It's very weird.
So when you're
I feel like I'm just like talking to a friend.
Okay, so when you're talking, okay, I'm so glad I can get a little insight into like someone who is really into doing it, because you love it, right?
I do.
Yeah.
But I will say I don't love reels as much. Like I love my story because I could show up there and I love stories. I love stories too. Like you just show up, you share your little bit, whatever it is that's coming through, and you're out. I don't know. I have something around reels. Like I haven't completely figured out, I feel. And then being on camera when I teach, that's like
the best.
The ultimate. Like, because that's just.
But I think that's why probably I like stories too, because it feels like you're just in a channeling of a moment.
Yeah.
Where reels feel like, let me have a production.
Like published, right?
Yeah. And it's like, listen, I went through the phase of like, oh, like maybe I need to like hire a social media person and like tell me what to do. And it was like, okay, this is like how you do it with the reels. And it's like, you got to do this. And it's like, okay, so now it feels like a performance.
And like the hook and the, I can't.
Yeah. And it's like, and it's also, it's like the trending audio. And it's like spending so much time in that. And I think that that's really overwhelming. And so like my hope is that by me showing up, I actually speak to a lot more people like me who have something they want to say and know it doesn't have to be polished or perfect, and know that like you don't have to naturally love the spotlight to still step into it and still allow yourself to be seen. And then to also recognize that like this is one thing I've known about myself and like I'm good with this. Like not everyone's going to like me.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, we have to be okay with that.
We have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Like we really have to get okay with that. Yeah.
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 Recently you shared, and you kind of summed it up here, of saying like, if you're not sharing who you authentically are, those people who want that, who need that, aren't going to find you. And that really hit me because I feel like over the past few years, there's been things I've wanted to say and share, but I've retreated back within because I'm like, oh, I already know the other perspective. I already know what people will say to like go against what I'm sharing. Or I don't want to offend someone because I truly try to respect all differences and all different opinions. And then today on Nikki Boswick's story, do you follow her?
I do, but
Boswick,
I don't.
Or Boswick?
Yeah, I know her.
You know her.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I know of her. Yeah.
So she posted today this blurb being like, I am not here to validate your perspective. I am here to share my perspective. I don't care how it makes you feel. This is my page. I'm sharing what I think and what I feel, and you can unfollow and you don't have to. And I was like, the Libra in me is like, I love you. I want to be like you. Like, this is incredible.
I feel like the Libra, but I also feel like the Libra like you is like, well, maybe we can find a middle ground. Maybe we can figure out a way that everyone.
Yes and yes. Like, yes and yes. Like, I love the courage. I think these times we're living in demands a lot of courage right now. But it also it includes that respecting and really hearing and having compassion for all things, which is that Libra element too.
So I will tell you that I believe that I have room for tons of perspective, and I can see so many different sides to so many different situations. I think that's the power of the practice.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that part of why we practice and why we do it is so that like we are non-reactive.
Mm-hmm.
The less reactive I am, the more I have space to see like tons of different possibilities in front of me. And often those possibilities can be completely conflicting with like what I believe, but I still can see that as a possibility for someone else. And I don't believe that I have to be right about everything, but I believe that I have to leave room for other people's opinions. And one of the things that I try to do on my platform is show that like in every single situation, there's multiple views and there's multiple feelings. And I'm going to go there. So during the election, I had written stuff that to me was very neutral, which is because someone voted a certain way does not make them a certain thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't make them bad because they voted for one person. Doesn't make them good because they voted for another person. The reasons why they voted for that person are actually what determine if they're good or bad.
Yeah.
Unfollows.
So expansive.
Massive. The amount of DMs I've got of what a horrific human I am. I should die. Like, and I will stand by what I said 1,000 times over. Like, I will die on that cross. Like, the way you vote does not determine if you're a good or good. There are plenty of reasons for you to vote for either candidate. Mm-hmm. And the actual action of the vote is not the determining factor. It's the reasoning behind it. And that is actually in any situation you're in. There are multiple things and people believe that like one thing means something else. And it's just not true. There's like so much that goes on behind the scenes. And there's so many different ways that people see things and the ways that people choose things. And like the amount of backlash that I got, people like my clients who've worked with me for years were like going off and like left working with me. And I'm like, it's literally what I've taught from the beginning of time. It's no different. And it doesn't become not valid because it's triggering you. And I think that like you had mentioned something about validation.
Yeah.
I don't have to validate your emotions, right? And so many people are like, you have to like validate that you don't. I don't have to validate your stuff is true if it's not, right? And I don't have to, whether it's feelings about me, whether it's feelings about something else, it's like not everything gets to be validated because not everything is true even though someone's feeling it. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about moons is that we really get in touch with understanding our feelings. And then meditation practice is understanding that I'm not my feelings.
Yeah.
Right? And so people, I feel like sometimes they want them to be black and white answers. And it's just, there's so much in the middle. There's so much gray. There's so much nuance. And our world right now feels like they don't want any room for that. And so while it feels like, I'm sure you're tempted to be like, me and you have conversations off, in the DMs and the text, right? And like, I don't know that all those conversations are always going to be available for social because we're left in the space that like, we're not looking to alienate people. Yeah. Not because either me nor you are scared of being canceled. Yeah. I think it's more that like, ultimately my hope is that I can help change as many people as possible. And if I am too busy alienating them and making them feel like they can't, closing them to my message, then there's no way for me to adopt any change. And so I think a lot of, and I believe you were similar in me, is that the reason why sometimes we pull back in some of what we might want to say isn't for fear, isn't for the idea that we're scared we're going to get canceled or unfollowed. I don't care. Don't follow me. It's more that, will that stop me from actually being able to help more people? And will I become, I don't want to convert the converted.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I want to help more people have more perspective, even if the perspective is different than what I believe. I want them to have room to see multiple things and not be reactive.
And what I've come to really sit with is the work that we do helps exactly that. So we don't have to talk about anything. We're entering a space and a realm that helps us to tap into our truth and dissolve the programs, because so much of what you said, it was like my mind was just screaming programs. Yeah. When you said they were unfollowing, they were not working with you anymore, because you went against what they have been either fed or brainwashed or led to believe for any situation. And I think so much of what we wish to do in this world is to help people break free of programs, find what their truth is within, and that can be different than ours. And that's okay. We don't want all of our students believing exactly what we believe because we believe it. Like, that is not the goal here. The goal is to awaken the truth within. And the other thing is, when you were saying, you say things so eloquently, how you shared that the vote isn't the right or wrong, it's why you voted and the context in which you voted. All of that is based off of our personal preferences and beliefs and priorities.
Yeah, and like our lives, and there is no denying that everyone lives a life through their experience. You can't, literally, my first email back in the day was my reality. It's literally what it is, because I recognized from a very young age that I'm going to live in my reality, because there's no other reality for me to live in, because it's what I've seen and what I've experienced. And so with that, I can't expect someone who grew up in a completely different background than me to have the same exact vision of what they see is happening or what matters to them. And I think that that's the part that, whether forget even if you're talking about voting, it's more about whatever you're talking about with any type of action. It's understanding that it's not just the action. It's also all the intention and thoughts behind the action, because it's not always black and white. There's so much nuance, and there's so much need for conversation and context. And I think that in general, there are things that I've definitely been I don't get super controversial, so I won't go into details of it. I'm I know all this and da-da-da. And then I will go on the complete antithesis side of what I'm thinking to specifically get what I'm looking at debunked to see if I can actually understand that other perspective. I think of it I always talk about how whenever we're in conversation with anything, whenever we're relating to anyone else, one of the biggest skills that we can do is be in a non-reactive space from our meditation practice, right? We have a moment of pause, so I can go around and I can see my opponent, the person opposite me. And I can actually look at the thing that we're talking about, arguing about, from the perspective that they're having it. And if I can see it from their eyes, I don't have to agree with them, but maybe I can understand them. And I think ultimately, I want to understand more. I want to understand why they think that way and still allow them to think differently than me. But I also want them to understand that for me as well. And I think that's missing in this world on all different sides. So it's not even just in the way that I think a lot of people are just locked into being in an echo chamber and in a belief and really, really far into whatever thing it is, when usually most things are somewhere in the middle.
So much in the middle. And when you're saying there's so much nuance, things aren't black and white, the other aspect of this is we're living in the time of energy where there is so much unseen. We're perceiving less than 1% of reality. And with every headline,
I would argue with our meditation practice, we're seeing a little bit more.
100%.
So
100%.
Give us 2%. Give us 2.
But I completely agree. With our third eye wide open, we're seeing a lot more than just less than 1. But it's the time of energy. And I think like with every headline, with everything that comes up on social media, it's like, this is less than 1% of what's real. Like that's how I see it. And I kind of came into this world like that, knowing that there's a lot more than what meets the eye.
Yeah. Lots
In
of layers.
every aspect.
Yeah.
Everything we're being presented, that's just the surface. And there is so much more below the surface. So I really came into the world having that knowing. And now we're living through a time where like we're digging below the surface and we're seeing things come up below the surface. And it's like, that thought wasn't so crazy now, was it?
You know what's interesting that when you say that, when I think about the reels and stuff like that, and I think that that's probably where you and I both sort of have a different thing, because it's such a manufactured thing, but it's not like the depth of something that's real and organic. And I think that's where we're talking about this, like when something is super produced, it's really hard. It's trying to actually like cover the layers because it's super produced. When you're on story or you're in something that's a little bit more natural and you're just having this conversation, like, just so you all know, like there were no notes beforehand. There was no like, this is what we're going to talk about. What are you promoting? It was like, hey, what are we going to talk about? I don't know, press record and we'll see, right? And so in that, I think that it allows like a lot of the facades to come down, because it's just, there isn't this idea that we're projecting or we're trying to see something or it's really heavily produced. It's like, it just is. And I think that hopefully allows some of the layers to come down. And then when you talk about like with the world that we're in, like so much is just so produced that like, it's just not real.
Yes. And I feel like so often when going back to content, I struggle being like, how do I articulate feeling the connection of oneness on a freaking Instagram reel? How do I like bow that up, wrap it up and bow it so someone can understand what I'm experiencing through my practice? How can I like, it's almost, instead for me, it's almost like, how can I replicate the real thing? And I can't do that. Like you have to go within to feel and experience. Well, because
they have to have an experience.
Yes.
Right. And it's like, you can't deliver. I think that you and I probably both can deliver experience in workshops and classes, right?
Yes.
And again, the experience though is a consistent touching of it. It's not a one and done. Like people want it to be like, oh, my Kundalini is awakened. It's like, you know, it's more to it than that, right? Yep. And so I think that what we both, from what I know, right, we both believe in the experience. Yeah. And like there aren't words for it. You know, whenever I'm explaining Gurmukti, like the language of Kundalini, like my whole thing is like, sure, translate it. The translation makes no sense. It's English. It can't. It's energetic. It's a movement. It's sacred. Like there are no English words to define that mantra, because it's a change. It's a moment. It is more about an energy. It is not at all words. English, I'm sorry, I love you, English. I love my language, but it doesn't do what a sacred language does. And so we can't actually translate it, but we can hopefully help people experience it.
I have full body chills because it's so true.
Yeah.
And I remember like in the early days chanting and being like, I have no idea what this is. And then getting in my head and being like, well, what is this? Should I be nervous about what I don't know I'm saying? And then my body immediately said, no, you should not be. And you should keep doing this. And that was it.
Yeah.
Because it's so energetic and it's so true.
And it's just, it's a movement and it's a feeling, you know, when people like talk about meditation and, you know, it's so different when there's like a spiritual connection to it, you know, and that is often like through mantra and yes, of course, breath work too. But I also, after all these years of teaching Kundalini, and like my first Kundalini, like not to age myself, was in 1999 with my friend Heather on the beach in Venice, right? It was a long time ago. And and I would say to you this, is that like as many years I'm doing, I still don't define them. I still won't even look up and I still won't necessarily tell you exactly that this means sun, this means moon, right? Because I almost don't want it. I don't want an English reference point for it. I want it an energetic reference point. And so mantras that I've been doing, Satanama, don't ask me to translate it because I don't want to. I don't want to know it. I want to experience it, and it's beyond words.
And I think that is It sums up this practice so much that you don't need to know what it is. You don't need to know the translation. You don't need to know the intention of the Kriya or the meditation to have the experience. And in this very science-based world, people want it. And there's just like when I first started diving into what I was actually doing, I had the experience. I was like, oh my God, this really works. This is changing my life. Let me go learn more about this, because I was so curious, and I would geek out like the Kriya for the liver, and I would think about my liver getting all this vitality, and I love all of it. But that is secondary. The energetic experience is first.
I'm very much about using Kundalini as a tool in the shifting of the mind and really working in the mind stuff. And like, you know, I believe change happens on 3 levels, which would be cognitively, subconsciously, and energetically. And so the subconscious part obviously is the Kundalini part, but I very much also believe in the cognitive and the energetic. And for someone who needs it to be proven to them, you have to ask them, why do you want to not believe so bad? Like, why are you so committed to not believing? You know, and it's like, if you actually try to do this work and you give yourself, let's call it 3 months, and you actually try it and you actually are present for it and you actually do it every single day, I find it almost impossible to believe that you can't have a change.
Yeah.
Because it's an energetic thing, and it's something that moves, and it moves you, and it's very different. Like, you know, we're whacking all our arms, we're doing all these weird things. And like, I always used to joke and say like, do you know that meditation when you're doing it, when like you're rolling on the floor and you're not allowed to move your arms?
Yes.
And you roll.
Yes.
Have you ever? So I used to do it in my old apartment. And I remember doing it and being like, this is insane.
Ridiculous.
Like,
if
what?
anyone
Like,
catches a glimpse of this.
Like, what the fuck? Oh, sorry.
Why did we go there?
I've been really good this whole time. And I'm like, what? You know? And then like, I remember in this like very clear moment, I'm like, that's actually it. Is like, what am I worried about? Someone seeing me roll around? Like, who cares? And it's like this idea that like, that's not normal. That makes you weird. And it's like, who cares? The ability to laugh at yourself, you know, is priceless. And really,
breaking
really
patterns isn't normal. It's not part of the norm, but we have to do these things to help us break the pattern.
Yeah, you got to disrupt.
Yeah.
You got to disrupt. And sometimes that means rolling on the floor without your arms working.
Literally.
You know?
Yeah. When we first met, I remember I was presented with a challenge of someone kind of questioning like what I teach and what I do and how I could do that and why I do it. And the first thing you said, like this was the first moment we met, you were just like, it's all about the experience, and you've had the experience. And that's why you know that this is from your soul and this is aligned for you. And I think like, I know we've spoken about the controversy around Kundalini and the things that have come up about the practice or the teachers. And I know you always go back to, in that moment of question and challenge, you immediately went into the experience and how if you've experienced, whether you consider it a Kundalini awakening, a connection with God, a connection to your soul, there are no other questions really that we need to ask. And I found that to be so profound and true. Like you just like hit it right on the head. And I was like, yes, this experience has been major and nothing's going to change that no matter what anyone tries to tell me.
And like, I've been told by so many people, like, you need to stop teaching it. You need all this kind of stuff. And I will say to you that like, I can't. It's irresponsible for me to, because at the end of the day, I've seen it change so many people and it's changed myself. And so why would I ever 100% my son came to be because I was in a Kundalini class with Guru Jagat, who I was my teacher, and incredibly amazing, incredibly flawed, both equally.
And that can exist all in one.
And that actually gave me permission to recognize that like I can be flawed, because let me tell you, I am far from perfect, and that is okay. And it doesn't mean that you can't expect the teacher to be perfect, because they're still in human form. Mm-hmm. And so we're not supposed to be perfect. We're supposed to be human. And I think we have to allow our teachers to be human, which means that they're not all good, because no one is all good. No one's all bad. We're all, in a lot of ways, hopefully doing the best we can, you know? And I think that with that, and again, I will always feel deeply, deeply, deeply grateful for Guru Jagat. Like, I very much credit her for why I decided to have a baby. It was in her class. She was someone who I
Really?
talked
Wait,
to.
can you tell me more about this?
I was like deep into like the Kundalini. I was really, I was all in on every single, I still am, but like meaning like I was all in her classes. I was doing it all the time. And, you know, my childhood wasn't amazing, not because I didn't have amazing parents. I had really bad friends.
Aw.
And I, you know, really did not love my childhood experience. And from a very young age, I was like, I would not wish this on anyone. I would not wish I was like a redhead when redheads weren't cool. It was like I was taller than everyone. I got boobs before everyone. Like none of it was good. And it was very, very torturous on many, many levels. And I always grew up thinking about how my mom handled that, how my mom handled me. And again, like I love my mother. I joke around. My mother gave me all the reason to find all the tools that I found to be okay. But I also know that I'm super blessed, like, and she's super flawed. But she's also amazing in love and all of that stuff. But in the home that I grew up in and how she mothered and my experience, I was very committed to never wanting to have a child because I didn't want to put another human through that. And the thought of like a child of mine experiencing that, I just didn't want that for them. And I was in the New York City studio and I was doing like whatever class I was doing or whatever training. I did like every training possible. And it was this very clear moment where I was like, oh, you could do it different. You can raise him from the lens that you are and be a completely different mom. And my husband was also a hell no on children. And the irony of it is that like this happened like in a class. I was thinking about it all weekend. I was at Gabby's, like she would have these stuff at Capello back in the day, Capello. And then like me and my friend Robin, my friend Jenny, we would all always go to them. It was like our girls' weekend. And we were there and I didn't even tell Gabby yet. And we were in the car ride. Gabby wasn't in the car. It was me, Jenny, and Robin in the car. And I was like, I think I'm going to have a baby. And they were like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I had this feeling, this Kundalini class. And they're like, oh my God. They're like, what is Will going to say? He's a hell no. I'm like, I don't know. And they were like, are you going to tell him? I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, when are you going to tell him? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, when it feels right. And I came home and we were watching, it was like Jerry Seinfeld, Cars, whatever. And he had a guest on. And the guy said to Jerry, what is like the greatest thing you could ever be called? And he was like, and Jerry was like, I don't know. And then the guy was like, it's dad. You know, it's dad. Isn't that the greatest thing you could ever be called? Dad. And then I literally, without thinking about it, looked at Will and I was like, do you want someone to call you dad? And again, he was a hell no before this. And he looked at me and he was like, only if you want someone to call you mom. And I was like, I think I do. And he was like, okay. And we literally like just started like that night, you know,
and then got to work.
We got to work and then like we went through all the IVF and all the things. And like, yeah, and that's kind of how that happened. But it definitely was like in her class. And it also was for us a long journey to get to that.
I want to talk more about that too, because that was your recent post that it was just such a beautiful share that you had and how it, in hindsight, it kind of makes sense and your appreciation and your experience now is different because of that. That's kind of like paraphrasing what you shared
because of that
about your journey.
So the journey was a lot, and that's like a whole nother episode. And it was a long journey, but partially because of my practice, partially because of what I learned in Guru Jagat's room, is understanding that I get to choose whatever the experience I want is. And like the circumstances don't actually matter. What matters is my experience in the circumstances. And it was over a year and a half journey for Will and I. And no one believes this to this day, the most romantic part of our marriage. Aww. The most beautiful, close, amazing. We played mantra every time we did shots. And like Will is not by any stretch into any of this. He's into it for me. Yeah. But he is
That's
not.
All that matters.
You know, I remember I used to talk to Guru Jagat about that. I'd be like, he doesn't meditate. And he's like, he doesn't have to. And she's like, do you want him in a turban, like shaking around with you? And she's like, I feel like that's a no for you. I'm like, that is a no for me. And she's like, so leave him alone. She's like, you need it. He doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, and the woman holds the energy of the home, the aura of the home. And so like, she's like, do it for you guys. And so in that, I will say that like very much the practice helps me to understand that I get the choice as to how I experience everything. And I can make something where everyone's like, oh, I feel so bad for you. That was a really hard. No, it wasn't. And I remember I like once went to a healer and she projected all this crap onto me when she was like, let's do some energy work around clearing how horrible that you just went through a year and a half of IVF. And I'm like, but it wasn't horrible. I'm like, I wouldn't have changed a thing. I'm like, it was Will and I literally, he went to every single appointment with me. We made every single appointment a coffee date. He missed one shot because he had to travel, and we did it like at 3 a.m. It was like the shot that you do to right before whatever that shot is called. And it was beautiful. And it was so close. And yes, I will even say it was fun. And I did breath work. I didn't even let them knock me out for the retrievals. I did breath work, and I would talk to the doctors and they'd be like, you're crazy. And I'm like, but I made it fabulous because I can. And it wasn't toxic positivity. It was the earthly experience just is. Yeah. It's what we put on the earthly experience that makes it either. And so, but back to the Kundalini thing.
I'm thinking about that moment you were in class, and I mean, we could describe it any different way, but I think of that frequency shift that sometimes happens where all of a sudden something that wasn't in our forward vision, that may have been in the peripheral, all of a sudden it opens up and you're like, I do have the frequency to be a mother. I can make this so different. The story I've been telling myself is a false program that's running. Yeah. And oh my goodness, and you opened up a whole different layer of your life.
Did you ever hear the teaching? And I'm sure I've like altered it along the way, so it might be different than you talked about it, than you've heard about it, but it's talking about like the intuition. And the idea is that like the more you do the practice, the more you have the ability to see like 85 steps forward. Mm-hmm. And you can see all the steps happening at the same time. The more you have that open mind, the more you have that open perception. And from that, true intuition is not just sort of seeing all these steps in front of you, but it's seeing the 85 steps forward and being able to like run them through really, really quickly to pick the one that takes you where you want to go. Right. And so I think of that all the time in understanding like why the practice is so important. Like I have not missed, I'm sure you haven't. Have you ever missed a day from the day you started?
No, unless I'm like really not feeling well. Like recently, like if I had the virus or something, because I feel like it generates a lot of energy that like if I'm unwell, like I'm resting, I'll like tune in and that's it.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. Like if I'm out for the count, I'm out for the count and I'm just resting. And people will message me all the time, be like, what's Kundalini I could do while I'm sick? And I sometimes tell them, I'm like, you might need to just rest, because I'll start sweating by tuning in. Like I feel my energy activated. The other night, my heart rate, I have a resting heart rate of 42. Like I have a very low resting heart rate.
So do I, actually. Really? To the point where like there was crazy stuff when I like had my baby, when I had Porter, and like they were telling that like my heart rate was really elevated, and like the nurse was like, it's actually not elevated. It's lower than most people. It's just elevated compared to what yours is. You know?
When I was teaching the other night, it went up to 128, and it picked it up on my Aura ring.
I'm thinking of getting one of those. I can't.
I like it decide. So far. I like it so far. It's not like life changing. It just gives more.
But I don't like my fingers is the problem. So I want it on my pointer finger like that.
Put on your pointer.
But I have a very short finger, and so it won't look as nice.
They don't look short. You could try mine on later and see if you like it. But I don't know. I think it generates a lot of energy. But other than that, tuning in every day. I don't miss a day in my practice because it's the most sacred time of my day.
I won't. Like, so I had a C-section, did in the hospital. Will was like cracking up because
I remember you saying
they were coming in the room, and Will be like, come back in 5 minutes, because they see me. I'm chanting God. I'm doing all the
He's
things.
Looking at the mantra, like 5 more minutes left of the 11 minutes.
He's like, give her a moment. She's screaming God right now. I will tell you this. Before I met the practice, before I became devoted to the practice, I was not living a life that felt good in my body. And in becoming devoted, everything changed.
Yeah.
And forget even the outside stuff that changed, the inside changed. And I will not play with that. Like I know what it was before
Yeah.
and I'm not going
Yeah.
back. And so like I literally don't miss a day. What I will do sometimes is, and it's very rare, like, so I had the C-section and then like other things were happening. And so it was like very hard. I'll play all the meditations that I normally was going to do that day and visualize myself doing them. I just might not physically do them. And then when someone says to me like what to do when I'm sick or I'm not feeling well, I'm like overloaded with it. I'm like, put on the mantra and close your eyes and envision yourself. And I think it's important, like visualization in general is really important. So I love that as an exercise of like, if you don't have the energy to do it, see yourself doing it. And therefore you'll understand that you can actually feel yourself doing it.
Yeah. And
well.
playing of the mantra too.
Yes. Gotta love the mantra.
Teleports you. Truly.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it quiets all the noise. Yeah. And instead you hear mantra. I'm sure you do you hear mantra in your head like almost all the time?
Constantly.
Yeah.
And when I first started, I remember being in training. I did it at Kundalini Yoga East.
Yeah. Which you can feel like that energy in that space.
Oh, in that actual space? Yeah. Totally. But I remember like it being a Sunday night. We were there for like 8 hours or so. And then the last half hour, like I was ready to go home, drive home to Long Island. It's like a trip. And they're like, okay, we're going to do 33 minutes of chanting mantra. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I'm like, I'm supposed to sit here and say these words that I don't know. And then all of a sudden you start and you're like, whoa, is this a trip? Like, did I just take a trip? And then I was like, okay, this is just as great as breath work. I didn't realize. Forgive me for not realizing.
I actually think mantra is more powerful.
I've learned that too, in my experience.
Yeah, it's like breath work is like the gateway, but mantra is actually like where it goes down.
Do you do the Aquarian sadhana mantras a lot?
Which one?
The Aquarian sadhana.
I pick my own. Like I do my own because like that's again like my little rebellious me like has to like decide it. So I
love that.
But have you done White Tantra? You have to because you had to, right?
Only once, and then they stopped for a long time
because of.
I think
I did it 3 or 4 times, and like the fact that I was able to get through that, like God bless, insane. Like.
They say that one day is equal to 10 years.
I think it's more. Is it just 10?
I thought 10. I remember
it's
one
wild.
time I like freaked out midway. We were chanting Om Namo Gurudev Namo for 62 minutes and I left my body.
Did you do it with someone you knew?
Yes, with my friend Victoria.
So one of the times I did it was with a partner they just gave me. Like I was with people I knew. That was like, talk about a challenge.
Yeah. Because you're staring them in the eye.
And
your hands are up with them sometimes.
And you have to hope that they'll hold the energy with you. You know, there's so many things too. It's White Tantra is it's one of those things that you're like, I'm really proud of myself that I got through that. I did that.
Yeah. And then you're lit after. You're like so supercharged.
Yeah. Yeah. But in Kundalini East, so I used to do, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's like Ramadasan, I want to say. It is like the healing practice. It's almost like Reiki, but in like the Kundalini kind of lineage.
Well, the Ramadasa is like the healing one.
Yeah, but it's like Ramadasayan. I'm forgetting it right now.
Okay.
Because like they don't do it there anymore. So you would go on like a Sunday night. And you would go and it's like carpeted there. You know, it's like
when people ask me, they're like, where did you get trained? I'm like, you're probably going to envision one thing and it's going to be very different than what you're envisioning. But I love you have
old
fun.
Player, like an old like stack, you know what I mean? With like a CD and like a record player on top.
And if you got a cushion, it was like, oh my
very
God,
old.
You got a cushion.
And very old.
Yes.
So there was a certain energy that was very cool. It felt to me like the beginning. It felt like it was there from like the 60s. And so you would do this and and it was basically like similar to like Reiki, right? Which I very much, love and I do. And that's part of a lot of the Reiki bath stuff that I do. And that's like the energetic body that's so important. But it would be like you get with some random person and that's your partner and you're doing kind of like healings around them with chants. Like there isn't really like a practice. You're just kind of like hands above and doing this stuff. Every time I went there, you would have thought I took like 10 tabs of acid. I would walk out. What is it on 18th and Broadway? At the time I lived on 5th Avenue and 16th Street, 2 blocks away. One time I fell down the stairs, couldn't get up. The other time I walked out and I was on the phone with my husband and I couldn't find my way home. I didn't know where I was.
I believe it.
Like every single time I would
Yeah.
do it, it was like it would take me to such a place that it was very, very hard for me to ground after. Yeah. So it's important to ground.
I believe that so deeply. I feel like, do you know Guru Joss?
Yes, she was part of my training.
Yeah, I work closely with her, and she,
Talk about
over the last
voice.
few years,
Talk
oh
about sound current.
my gosh. Over the last few years, she brought to my awareness that it's really important to ground, and that I really didn't want to for a very long time, because when you connect to this, you're like, it's so beautiful there. I don't want to be here. Why do I want to be here? But the grounding is so important.
I
It's
always
so
explain
important.
that, like, here's the thing that we have to understand is that, like, we are in the 3D. We are Earth
Exactly.
beings. And so, like,
Yep.
we have to be here. That's why we're in
here.
this time,
Yep.
right? You know? So that's
Yeah.
it. Now, also, like, I always think about it as we have to ground. We have to, like, be able to go really deep into the foundation so we can push off to reach the stars.
100%.
And you really can't actually reach them if you aren't going
Yeah.
like that. You know, it's like anything
Yeah.
yogically, right? It's like the more you can go in, the higher you can go, the bigger the stretch can be.
Root to rise,
Yep.
baby.
There you go.
Right?
And I think that, like, that's it. And it's funny, like this year with like the nodes moving and going into Pisces, like I'm actually, and like my new container, it's like much more about less grounding, right? Because I think so much is like so grounded and like
Yeah.
we're so earthly, and like that is just as problematic as being ungrounded. It's like we
Yes.
want to remember that there's so much more, like you were saying earlier, there's so much more happening than we realize. There's
Yeah.
tons of different things and we miss it and we miss the magic. And why I love Kundalini is that I think it really reminds you of the magic. It reminds you of the fact that we're co-creating with something outside of yourself. I call it God, but you can call it whatever you want to call it, universe, source, whatever. And that Kundalini like brings that back in. And so you're able to like leave the earth for a second and then bring it back down.
Yeah.
But really understanding that like we don't want to be in this, you know, right? The South Node, the Virgo. It's like we don't want to be in this like really earthly practical, because only thing like I think about it in, if you're in that really practical, grounded, earthly space, you can't create something that hasn't been yet. Because you're only doing it from what you've already seen. But if you can go into that Piscean energy, it's like it's formless. It hasn't been yet. It's like all available and all possible. And so I have to be able to sort of like leave the earth and go into the ether so I can find something that hasn't actually been brought down yet.
Yeah. I also see it sometimes as I can do work in this realm. I could do the emails. I could do the reach outs. I could do the PR, whatever it is, all the earthly things.
Yeah.
And then I could sit in my meditation and go into that quantum state. And that could be like 75 of it. That could be 100% of it. So it's like that marriage between the earthly and then relying on the energy to do its work too.
And I think that like one of the things that's really important about that is that two things. It's like when we're doing the earthly from a really earthed energy of like email that person, like, right?
Check.
and like make this happen, right? It's like, we know that ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
That email's not going to land well. It's not going to turn into what we want it to turn into. But when it's like the action comes from the meditation, like from the divine, from source, and like that energy stays with us as I send the email, that one's going to land completely differently. And so it's not that we don't do our earthly actions, but we make sure they're coming from a divine inspiration.
Yeah.
And that's usually met in, not just in the actual meditation. I always say this, and I'm sure you agree. It's like the meditation isn't about the 20 minutes, the hour that you're sitting in meditation. It's about like what happens after. It's about how you actually show up in the world from having that daily touch of meditation. And it's like those downloads that you get to email that person, to reach out to that person. And then that energetically is so different. Someone had sent me a message about like, you know, I can't really do this work right now because like I really need to like hire that publicist to get me to that next place. I'm like, listen, the publicist is irrelevant. It's you figuring out how to get to that place energetically, and that it can be found.
For so long, I was saying the universe is my publicist. Like that That's what I rely on most.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's my publicist. My energy is my publicist.
And again,
And
we have to
that's-
take the earthly
yeah.
actions, but like
Yeah.
they're from that energy that you
Yeah.
just described, not from like this energy
Yeah.
and not from the controlling energy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard to always, and again, why practice is so important is, you know, like the difference. You can feel the difference in your body when you're taking that action from the controlly space, which we know is never like the space of creation, or the flowy state.
Right. Or the download, like now is the time. Like when, if you have a publicist now, it's really going to expand you. Like it's a different way of making those types of earthly decisions.
Yeah.
From a different frequency.
Yeah. And if you're not in a place of worth,
yeah,
hiring that publicist is not going to get you the things that you want.
Yep.
Even if you get the actual placements, like it's not going to land, it's not going to stay. It's like you have to be able to hold it. I'm sure Guru Jas probably talked about that a lot. Is that like you can't hold, like if you're not doing the work, you might even call in all the things, but can you hold them?
Yeah. I taught a meditation around that. It's the left side of the aura, that specific meditation where you activate the left side, which helps you to hold it. I think it comes in on the right and then you hold it through the left side. Because it's an interesting theory that like, yes, we could call it in, but can we hold the frequency and hold all that we want?
And I would go back to what you're saying is like, I don't think of it as prescriptive like that. Like, I don't think it's like I have to do a specific meditation to make it hold more. It's like I have to do the meditation and the cognitive conversation and energetic work to hold it, right? Totally. It's like you have to touch all three levels, all of them, in order for you to actually create sustainable change.
Right. No,
you know?
it's so true. It's really true.
All of it.
I know. I can talk to you for literally hours.
I think it has been hours. Has it been hours?
It's been hours. It's been 1 hour. Okay, well, we could do like 3 more easily. But we're going to have to come back for another, because just as I knew, it would just be such a guided and soul-aligned conversation. Oh, I'm so grateful for you and everything that you share. Can you share where everyone can find you, how they can follow along? Learn from you.
Organically Jamie is where you find me on Instagram, or organicallyjamie.com is my website. And then I have my program, which is Guided by the Moons, which is how, and just so you know, it's not an astrology program. It is using the moons to go through the different facets of ourselves. And then we work on the cognitive, the subconscious, and the energetic body so that we can create change and hold it.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh. My pleasure. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation with Jamie, just as I thought we all would. She's such a grounding presence and just reaffirming of our truth. Like, you know, when you're with those people who just reflect your truth and your knowing back to you, I feel like that is the energy that she gives. She's so wise, has so much experience in what she does. And I was so excited to chat with her today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. You can follow Jamie at Organically Jamie on Instagram. And I hope to see you in the next podcast episode. Sat Nam.